Welcome to the Man of Recaps. This is You, Seasons 1 through 3. Meet Joe Goldberg, a nice normal guy who manages a bookstore, but one day his life changes when a woman walks in and he has a meet-cute with Guinevere Beck. Joe is instantly smitten. In fact, his inner monologue changes, talking to Beck, "Hello, you," which gives the show its name. Now, like any reasonable modern dater, Joe immediately starts stalking her social media. But he goes a step further and starts stalking her offline. Oh yeah, nah, he's a creeper. But Joe's not a bad guy who wants to hurt her or anything, and we get his inner monologue where he's convinced himself this is all very reasonable. So much like Dexter from back in the day, Joe is an anti-hero we can kind of root for, and the tone of this show is not a psycho thriller. Joe's stalking problem is more of a dark comedy. So Guinevere Beck is trying to be a writer, but she spends a lot of time partying with her friends, and one night drunkenly taking the train home, oh no, she falls and Joe's gotta save her. They have a second meet cute. Oh yeah, you're the girl from the bookstore. What a coincidence, only in New York, right? And so their love story is off to a great start, but there's immediately a problem. Beck's current kind of boyfriend, Benji. He's a douchey trust fund hipster who doesn't really respect Beck, so Joe's like, oh Beck, I gotta save you from him. He lures Benji into a dark hallway and hits him with the hammer. Okay, so Joe does kill people. Except he's really bad at killing people. Benji survives, but now Joe's got him locked in a cage. Why does Joe have a creepy glass cage? Well, it's in the bookstore. It's to preserve rare books. But as Joe found out when he was a kid taken in by the bookstore owner, it also is a great place to lock people up. So Joe uses his social media skills to make it look like Benji's on a bender and Beck's ready to cut him out of her life. And with him out of the picture, Joe and Beck can resume their magical New York love story. Now Joe is convinced he's a good person. He doesn't want to kill Benji, but pretty soon he realizes he can't let him out without going to jail, and so he kills him. So now he's officially murdered someone, but he's like, hey, this was a good thing. I did it to save you, Beck. And that's really the essence of Joe's whole thing. He's got that white knight syndrome, wants to save Beck from all the problems in her life. And for a while, things are wonderful as Joe and Beck are madly in love. But soon there's a new obstacle, Beck's best friend, Peach Salinger, who doesn't like Joe and is overly possessive of Beck. So Joe puts Beck on his classic stalker baseball cap to investigate Peach. And after stealing her laptop, he finds out she is also obsessively in love with Beck. Joe needs a plan to get Peach out of the picture, but he's not a criminal mastermind. He just hits her in the head with a rock. And he continues to be terrible at killing people. She's totally fine, and now Beck's just spending more time with her to nurse her back to health. So Joe follows them to Peach's parents' country house where Peach is stalking Beck while Joe is stalking Peach stalking Beck. But after Beck goes home, Peach discovers Joe, and after a scuffle, he kills her too. With all the reading he's done, Joe is very good at writing believable suicide notes in other people's voices. But again, not a criminal mastermind. While he was hiding, he peed in a jar and left it there, a piece of physical evidence that the PI Peach's parents hired may or may not ever find. And so for a while, things are really good again. But soon Joe has bad dreams. He's being haunted by his ex-girlfriend, Candace. Candace has come up a few times. The story is she cheated on Joe and broke his heart and ran off with a boyfriend to Italy. But now we get to see they were in love, and Joe became overly possessive, and when he stalked them, found out she was cheating, he pushed this guy off the roof, and it sure looks like he killed Candace too. And now it's happening again. He suspects Beck is cheating on him with her therapist, Dr. Nikki. But unlike Candace, Beck comes clean. Yes, I was, but I broke it off because I love you, Joe, and these two can live happily ever after. Except, by chance, Beck finds Joe's secret hidey hole with all his stalker stuff, including evidence that links him to the murder of Benji and Peach. And before she can flee, Joe knows that she knows, so now Beck's the one locked in the book cage. He's like, Beck, I'm so sorry. I would never hurt you. Everything I've done has been to help you. I just gotta keep you locked in here until you cool down and realize that, which of course is never gonna happen. After a while, with nothing else to do, Beck starts writing. In fact, she writes the story of her and Joe, but she changes the ending so that it's her jilted lover, Dr. Nikki, who killed her friends and kidnapped her. And she's like, look, Joe, I love you. This'll be our story. You can let me out and we can live happily ever after. So Joe lets her out, but of course she was lying and tries to escape. Unfortunately, there's another cage upstairs, and Joe always keeps a spare key inside the cage just in case. And so Joe realizes Beck is not his true love after all, and he does murder her, so yeah, kind of a bad guy. Beck's story was a good one, and with the planted evidence, Dr. Nikki goes to jail. And in fact, Joe gets Beck's book published posthumously, and it's a huge hit. So even after murdering her, he's like, well, Beck, you're welcome. Now, almost immediately, a new woman walks in. Hello, you. But it's not a new you, it's an old you. It is Candace. Yeah, she's alive. She tracked him here. And that's where season 1 comes to an end. So in season 2, we see that Joe did indeed kidnap Candace, and when she tried to run, he accidentally killed her. But he's really bad at killing people. She was totally fine. Went to the cops, but with no physical evidence, there was nothing to do but pretend to be dead. But when she read Beck's book, she knows it was Joe who did it again, and now she's here to hang vague threats of exposure over his head. So Joe gets up to go to the bathroom, and he goes all the way to Los Angeles, where he hopes Candace can't find him. He gets a job at the organic supermarket, a Navrin, managing the little book section there. And though he's promised himself he's gonna stop stalking, almost immediately he spots a new girl. Hello, you. Her name is Love. She's the food supervisor here, and she and Joe have a meet cute. And she's real into Joe, asks him on a date for a taco tour of LA. It's a magical evening, and these two are off to a whirlwind romance house without Joe stalking her. Except we find out he actually met her earlier, and that's why he got the job there in the apartment where he can stalk her, so old habits die hard. Now Joe's actually going by a fake name this season, Will Bettelheim, which is the fake identity of the guy who was going to sell him a fake identity. And so the first thing Joe did when he got to LA was rent a storage unit and build a plastic book cage in there. But Joe really wants to be a better person this season, so he's like, hey man, I'm going to let you out and trust that you won't go to the cops. And because this guy's a criminal too, it actually works. He goes to the Philippines with his girlfriend and these two become friends. So as things with love are generally going good, Joe gets wrapped up in a major subplot with his building manager Delilah, who has a precocious younger sister Ellie who wants to be a filmmaker. She's landed an internship with this comedian Henderson, and Hendy seems like a good guy, but he and Delilah have some history. She can't prove it, but when she was a teenager, Hendy roofied and sexually assaulted her. So Joe wants to protect Ellie, use his stalking powers for good, and indeed one night, Hendy's gonna drug her, but luckily Joe's there to drug him too. Joe doesn't want to kill him, he just wants him to confess, but turns out Joe is really good at killing people when he's trying not to. And once again, Joe is not a criminal mastermind, but they do rule Hendy's death as suicide. Now Love's parents actually own a Novrin, and her twin brother 40 also kind of works here. He's a classic LA douche who thinks he's a screenwriter because he had one almost hit, but really he's just a Hollywood adjacent party boy. He is sober these days, except when he's not, and Joe's got to babysit him a bunch because Love loves him. Pretty soon Joe gets to meet Love's parents, who turns out are kind of awful people, but this brings Joe and Love closer together. They come up with their cute couple phrase, I wolf you. 40 has brought his new girlfriend to meet the parents too, but turns out it is Candace. She found Joe and is here under a fake name to loom the threat of exposure over him. So Joe puts on his stalker cap to take care of Candace, but turns out Love has it covered because she's rich and the Quinns have PIs on retainer. When Love exposes Candace, she tries to tell her that Joe's a stalker killer, but Love doesn't want to hear it. She does discover though that Joe lied about his identity. He tells the partial truth, I was running from my crazy ex-girlfriend, but she's like, I'm mad you lied to me, we break up. To make Joe jealous, Love immediately rebounds with a hot Australian, and Joe joins in and starts banging his neighbor Delilah. But even after Hendy's death, she's still trying to expose him, and when she finds out Joe was in his house, she does some snooping. She finds his secret creepy clear cage with Hendy's laptop in it. Just then Joe arrives and locks Delilah in the cage. He's like, look, I'm so sorry, I'm gonna let you go. He gets some time release handcuffs, like, hey, just chill out for a day while I book a flight out of the country. He figures Love is better off without him and leaves her a goodbye note, but just then 40 comes, hey, you read books, right? Can you help me write a script? Earlier Candace had convinced him to buy the movie rights to Beck's book, and now he's hired some goons to lock him in a hotel room so they can write with no distractions. As part of his process, they also do LSD, and hilariously 40 figures it out that Dr. Nikki was framed, but not that it was Joe. Meanwhile, Love found Joe's note and is like, hey Joe, I don't care what you've done, I love you no matter what, let's live happily ever after. So the next morning, Joe rushes to Delilah to discover she's already been killed, and he blacked out last night, doesn't remember if he did it. Turns out he did come here last night, but 40 also booty called Candace, which gave up this location. Now she rushes in and traps Joe in the cage. Haha, man, how do you like it? Before she calls the cops, she calls Love first because she knows her seeing Joe for who he really is will just hurt him more. But Love actually takes Joe's side and she kills Candace. Turns out Love has her own psychotic issues and she's willing to murder to protect the people she loves. She knew from the beginning that Joe was stalking her, but she took that as evidence that he loved her so much and she was into it. And when he wanted to leave town so Delilah could live, Love couldn't allow that and she killed Delilah. So you'd think these two are perfect for each other, but for Joe, this kind of ruins her. He convinces her to let him out, then is gonna kill her, but she drops a bomb, I'm pregnant! And Joe's whole thing is how he was abandoned by his mom at a young age, so this changes things. He's like, I'll never abandon this baby. Meanwhile, Candace told 40 how Joe was the murderer, and he went to talk to Dr. Nikki, who confirmed it. So 40 busts in to save his sister, and looks like this might be the end for Joe. But a shot rings out, and Joe's still alive. It was the cop that was following them and walked in on the situation. Love is devastated by her twin's death, so she and Joe decide to make a fresh start to move to the suburbs of San Francisco. The Quinn family money sweeps any loose ends under the rug, except for Ellie, who Joe doesn't tell everything to, but convinces to go start a new life and still sends her money sometimes. So Joe is set to live happily ever after with his wonderful wife who loves him, flaws and all. But Joe's not happy, he hates suburbia, and Love is not his you anymore. But almost immediately through his fence, he spots his neighbor. Hello, you. So in season 3, Joe and Love are living the new parent dream, but Joe's obsessed with his neighbor Natalie, so he puts on his baseball cap and starts a stalking. She's married to tech guy Matthew Engler, but she invites Joe over for a neighborly glass of wine because she's that unhappy housewife stereotype ready to have an affair. But Joe actually shuts it down. He really wants to be a good husband to Love. But Love can tell that his heart's not in it, and she gets suspicious, finds his stalker box. She has Natalie, a realtor, show her a listing for a new bakery, then down in the basement, kills her with an axe. Love's like, hey Joe, no more obsessing about other women, you love me only. And as Love and Joe work together to cover up this crime, it actually brings them closer together. So when Love opens her new bakery, in the basement they build a plastic cage, just in case. Natalie's disappearance makes national headlines. It's like, hey Love, we gotta lay low for a bit. But when their son gets the measles because one of their neighbors is an anti-vax idiot, Love can't contain herself. But this guy survives, so their cage gets its first prisoner, and they're hoping they can let him out if they find some good enough blackmail on him. But turns out their blackmail was too good, and this guy kills himself. Love's like, well, 2 birds, 1 stone. They plant an axe with his prints on it, and a suicide note confessing to killing Natalie, so both cases are wrapped up. Now Joe just can't keep away from books, so soon he gets a job at his local library. But he hits it off with his boss Mary Marianne, and before you know it, hello, you. So Joe gets back up to his usual stalker antics, and one day during a sprinkler malfunction, these two are making out. But she's like, whoa, Joe, we can't do this, you're married. And in fact, Joe's doing everything he can to keep this one secret so Love doesn't murder her. Luckily, Love is distracted with her own problems, trying to open a bakery in a town where no one eats carbs. Except for Theo, the neighbor's son home from college, who hits it off with Love. In fact, he falls in love with her. And though Joe's trying to hide it, she can tell he's distant, while Theo gives her that obsessive attention she craves. Meanwhile, they've befriended the neighborhood's queen bee with her alpha male husband, and these two are swingers, invite Love and Joe to join them, and Love's down to try if it'll put the spark back in their marriage. But as they get started, Joe is fantasizing about Marianne, and Love can absolutely tell. They have a blowout fight where Love explicitly talks about how they murdered Natalie, and it's apparent these two heard him, so this fun night takes a deadly twist. Now their cage has some new residents, and this does briefly reignite that spark. Meanwhile, Natalie's tech husband has hacked all the cameras to investigate her disappearance. When Theo finds out, he checks a different angle to find out Joe was driving the car. He tries to warn Love, your husband's a killer, but she's like, oh, you sweet boy, I'm the killer too. Joe and Madeline have fallen madly in love. He's like, hey, I'm gonna leave my wife and we'll run away together. But she has a daughter she can't take with her because her douchebag ex-husband has custody. Of course, Joe knows how to handle that problem, but he's really bad at killing people on purpose. For Madeline's sake though, he figures it out, and now these two can go live happily ever after. His only obstacle left is Love. He grabs a knife just in case, but she was one step ahead of him, poisoned the handle, and Joe is paralyzed. She calls Madeline over and is gonna make Joe watch while she kills her, but Madeline brought her daughter with her, and even Love wouldn't do that. Instead, these two have a nice heart-to-heart, and Love realizes it's Joe who's the problem. But as she's gonna kill him, oh, Joe is not really paralyzed. Yeah, he noticed her planting poison in their garden, so he's decided to take an antidote and make his own just in case, and now that is how Love dies. So Joe does what he does best, writes a suicide note from Love, confessing to all the murders and blaming Suburbia for driving her crazy. But the only way to avoid being implicated himself is to make it look like he was her final victim. As for their son, Joe realizes he's better off without them and leaves him with a nice couple looking to adopt. And Theo survives, he'll be okay, as well as this couple who come out even stronger. And Joe Goldberg, now with the freedom of being legally dead, starts over with a new identity in a new city. In fact, he's gone real far this time. He heads to Paris, looking for his current you, Marianne. Will he find her and finally live happily ever after, or will a new you take her place? We'll find out in You Season 4. If you liked this recap, hit that subscribe button for more of the best recaps of TV and movies.